Good morning. Fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of different amphora types were produced in Roman Africa, namely the coastal region of nowadays Algeria, Tunisia, and western Libya. The typology and the chronology of these containers is better and better known, and their production zones are better and better known as well. But their content is not. From the beginning of the 70s, African amphorae were mostly considered as oil containers. But the discovery of a lot of fish factories remains in Tunisia, as well as the new interpretation of the numerous press remains in the countryside, contributed to change our mind. And we accepted the idea of more diversified content. Finally, we are in the same situation as in the very beginning of the classification of the African amphorae, very different types produced in the same atelier, perhaps corresponding to different contents. Looking for the different contents, we have very few and weak arguments. Typology, very few titulopicti, which is a characteristic of the African production, the location of the workshops, the distribution of the products of the amphorae, the stopper types, the presence of visible pitch, some macro remains, and also very few chemical analyses. I will present the results in three categories. First of all, the points of agreement. Second, the dissenting opinions. And third, the gray areas. I am very sorry because I will repeat a lot of things I have already said everywhere and also written, but new results are very scarce. Points of agreement. That means that convergent hypotheses and arguments are recorded for one type. I will show you three examples. The example of Africana 1, Tripolitana 1 and 3, the example of Africana 2C, and the example of the African imitations of non-African types. Concerning the Africana 1 and the Tripolitana 1 and 3, the evidence comes from the Monte Testaccio dump, which characterize mainly olive oil containers. We could have some doubts about the type Africana 1, but recent analysis conducted by Nicolas Garnier showed that there is probably no doubt on olive or at least olive oil content or at least oil content. These recent analyses, in fact, confirm old ones performed by Françoise Formenty in the 80s, showing that there were fat acid traces in Africana 1, while there were not in the type Africana 2, particular Africana 2D. Indeed, we have some evidence about the content of one of the subtype Africana 2. This is the subtype 2C. This subtype 2C is well known to have been produced in Nabel due to the presence of the stamps and also the discovery of workshops, and probably linked with a huge production of salted fish in many fish factories along the coastline of Nabel. Another argument comes from lead labels discovered by Robert Lequément and interpreted due to the term ophicina with possible fish factories, along with the representation of a trident on one of them. Lastly, some fish remains have been found in some exemplars in underwater excavation, like in the Cabrera 1B wreck, showing us that probably these amphorae were transporting salsamenta fish products. The last examples are imitation of non-African types. Non-African types devoted to the transport of wine, like the type Dressel 2-4, imitated in Africa under the name of pseudo-Dressel 2-4 and mostly Chenemaux 35. Another example of imitation of non-African type is the imitation of the type Gaulish 4, named Dressel 30, probably devoted to the transport of African wine, and with a production not only in Mauretania caesariensis, but also in Africa proconsularis. One example is doubtful, as underlined by Paul Reynolds, the type Key 1B, which could be devoted to the transport of salsamenta, being not an imitation of the Gaulish type 4, but of possible Spanish types. Last example, the imitation of the type late Roman 1, evidenced by Gian Nassef in the 6th, 7th century AD, and characteristic of the production of the Sahel region, and probably devoted to the transport, the commercialization of the Byzantine wine. We have finished with the clear evidence, and now began the mess. The dissenting opinion concern the two main classes of African amphorae, which are the amphorae of Punic tradition and the amphorae of Greco-Roman tradition. Concerning the amphorae of Punic tradition, we have a global classification which needs to be performed, amélioré, by young scholars who are now working on this subject, namely in Spain. But we can distinguish three main types evidenced by Van der Werf during the 70s, the last 70s, and which are corresponding, in fact, with three production zones in Tunisia and Western Libya. That means that is type 1 is characteristic of the region of Carthage, while type 2 is characteristic of the Byzacena region, and Gian will emphasize this topic. And lastly, type 3 was produced both in Byzacena and in Tripolitania. As far as the content is concerned, we have some evidence coming from the successors of type 1. It is the so-called type Dressel 18, with very famous tituli picti indicating, as it seems, Alec and Moria, but indicating fish product. But we don't know if this evidence is applicable to the other successors of the type Van der Werf 1. That is, for example, the type Amamet 1, the type Carthage early Amphora 4, or some other types produced in the Sahel region, Leptimenius 1 and Usita 5210. The problem is that the scholars don't agree about the content of the early type Van der Werf 1. Some scholars think to the wine, as we have seen for Spain. It is the same problem, in fact. The possibility of the type Van der Werf 1 being a wine container has to be compared with some evidence telling us that the other types Van der Werf 2 and Van der Werf 3, were devoted to the transport of wine, and I think that Gian will complement this observation. Another important type of Punic tradition is the type Tripolitania 2. And we also have the same problem between a possible, due to the presence of visible pitch, the same problem of the distinction between possible containers with different content. The evidence comes from the location of the kilns, because we have some kilns located on the coastline, very close to fish factory remains, but we also have evidence of production in the inland region. So we cannot decide between a salsamenta content and a wine content. We have to search a little bit more. Concerning the second and more important family of African amphorae, that is the amphorae of Greco-Roman tradition, we have a lot of problems. I will begin with the earliest type, which is what we call nowadays early African type, because due to the work by Claudio Capelli and Alessia Contino, and also the discovery of probable kiln wasters by Imed Ben Jabania, we think that this amphora has to be distinguished from the early Tripolitanian one, which is a completely distinct type. And we can say that the production of the early African type was mostly focused in the Carthage and northwestern Tunisian region. But for the content, we will have the same problem as we had yesterday with all the ovoid amphorae found in Spain, namely. So a probable oil content, we have one analysis of one shared in Rome, chemical analysis by Mrs. Nota Stefano, but we cannot exclude other contents. We have to search more. Another important series of early African amphorae are the type Ostia 59 and 23. Early because they began earlier than the other classic African amphorae. That means the second half of the 1st century and early 2nd century, even if they continue to be produced until at least the mid-3rd century. The problem is the interpretation of the Tituli Picti present on some exemplars found in Pompeii. André Chernia recently did a rereading of these Tituli Picti, and he will be able, I think, to answer your question after the presentation. According to his interpretation, we have to read now the different Tituli Picti as referring to different quality of olives. I mean, maturation states of these olives, which could be green or picking with the hand or very soft. We have a problem with the 4th Titulus Pictus, which is Taur. And Taur, from the beginning, has been interpreted as related to the Tauromenium, the Tauromenitanum vinum in Sicily. But the problem is that such hypothesis is completely incompatible with the petrography as showed by the analysis conducted by Claudio Capelli. So we have to find perhaps another place, preferably in Africa, for interpreting Taur, if Taur is really a place. And we found the possibility in Tabraka, because Tabraka is abbreviated, often abbreviated in Tauraka in some maps of the empire, the Middle Empire, and also some bishops' list of the end of the Antiquity. So Tauraka could be a good interpretation, a new possible interpretation for Taur. In this case, another category of Olivae, and we have a series of Tituli Picti mentioning the origin of the Olivae contained in some amphorae. So probably our interpretation, not probably, our interpretation is that the Titulipicti of Pompeii tell us different quality of olives or of olives used for the preparation of the olive oil. It's impossible for the moment to be completely sure of one or the other interpretation. What is more sure is that the second type, Ostia 23, later type, is devoted mainly to olive oil because it's a direct predecessor of type Africana 1. So you can see that the problem is really difficult to solve in Africa. We have also the problem of the content of the Africana 2 because we don't know if the salsamenta content we have put forward for the type 2C is applicable to the other subtypes of the same amphora. Some other scholars proposed olives, and also some others proposed wine. The hypothesis of wine is particularly interesting for the subtype 2D, because we found a neck with some grape seeds stacked to the clay, indicating perhaps a wine content, or it could be also a mixed content, some fish product with addition of grape. It's also possible. We also have a DNA analysis performed by Catherine Henny on one doubtful sherd, in fact, of Africana 2D. And lastly, some stamps which have been studied by David Mattingly, David Stone, and Andre Jopaitz, showing us the drawing of vines and that they interpret for a possible indication of a wine content. But Gian will tell us about a new, different interpretation. But one very important argument is that Africana 2D is the predecessor, in fact, of one of the most important series of amphorae, African amphorae, which are the K25 amphorae, with three main subtypes, which are dated mainly back to the 4th century, and for the later examples, the first half of the 5th century. For 10 years, we have pushed forward the hypothesis of wine according to a series of arguments: the visible traces of pitch, systematic, the presence of cork stoppers instead of being in clay, a very large distribution, the wine amphora-like distribution, the constant capacity of one amphora, the apparition of this type at the moment of the institution of the canon Winarius, and only one analysis until very recently, one analysis made by Françoise Formanti, so not a sure analysis as showed by Nicolas the day before yesterday, but an analysis showing a comparison between an amphora from the Madrague de Gien wreck and an amphora from the Heliopolis 1 wreck with a cargo of Africana 25.1, Africana 3A. Recently, Marshall Woodworth, within the Coronam project, performed 20 analyses of this type of amphora, samples coming from underwater excavation and Dario's excavation in Algeciras. The most interesting samples are coming from two important shipwrecks, which are Heliopolis 1 and Pointe de la Luc B. At least 4 samples showed incontestable, I don't know if it's in English, traces of wine. 2 are coming from the Heliopolis 1 wreck, 1 is coming from the Pointe de la Luc B, And the last one is coming from the Rhone underwater survey. So it's very interesting now to have an evidence, a chemical evidence of the presence of wine in this subtype. I insist on this first subtype, K25.1, or African Afri A. Because in other samples, which are samples of another subtype, the K25.3 or African Afri B, Marshall, I speak under the control of Marshall, and he will add what he wants afterwards. In these samples, he found traces of animal fat, which could be interesting or to interpret as possible salsamenta fish product, if we consider that this variant is a specific nubble type. Lastly, I am wondering whether we could not find some possible successors of Africana 1 in the way of the K25, that means the middle dimension African Amphora. And perhaps I have found some possible candidates to this hypothesis. And in this case, we could have in the huge family of the K25 Amphora, the three main contents which could be represented. The last subtype, Africana RACIIC, is very particular because it's completely linked with the Spateia type 1, that means the miniature amphora of the 5th century. And this type 1 must be completely distinguished of the type 3 of the 7th century. We call it also Spateion, but it's not the same amphora, it's a completely different type. For the type 1, we have controversial data. That means that we have some olive bites in some exemplars, fish remains in others, and no visible pitch in others. I am wondering, so possible the three contents. I am wondering whether this amphora could not be a simple space filler as showed by the Dramont reg. That means an amphora with no specific content, but used in order to maximize the cargo of a ship at a moment or when the commercialization is changing a lot. That means during the first half of the 5th century. Lastly, the Spateion type 3. We have some evidence showed by Jean-Luc Fournet the day before yesterday, and I just remind you of the presence of the Titulus picti mentioning the garum, and also some fish remains inside. And we have finished with some possibilities of contents we could be discussed in the future. And we are entering into completely gray areas. And the completely gray areas are the amphora from the 5th century onwards, which is a very important period for the production of foodstuff in Africa, 5th, 6th, and 7th century. Probably, we must consider that there are also diversified content. For example, in the Dramont E reg, we have a series of amphora with visible pitch, and some other series with no visible pitch, probably two different content. I will show you some examples very quickly among the most diffused. For example, the type 35B with always visible pitch inside, and we don't know the content. I have some argument I can tell you if you want afterwards for salsamenta, but it's a pure hypothesis. This type K25 and 36 with the same petrography, probably the same workshop, because also the same details of the shape. We don't know if the difference in the volume is only a difference of module or also a difference of content. Another example is the series of the late Vandal Nabel production, with no evidence except one analysis made by Nicolas of the type 55, showing us that there were no oil inside. This type, Albenga 1112, is very interesting because Jean-Luc Fournet showed us shared with this famous Afro-Spanish Titulus Pictus. And perhaps if we consider that one example conserved is a stopper in clay, which is a characteristic in Africa of the oil content, could be considered as an oil amphora, but it's only an hypothesis, and we don't know if all the examples of Albenga 1112 were transporting oil. This type, which has been recently identified, could be interpreted as an oil container because it looks like an African one, but it's a pure hypothesis. We have no evidence. This one could be interpreted as a wine amphora because it looks like K25-1, but we have no evidence. It's a pure hypothesis. And this type is interesting because the only very sure traces of production is completely inside the country. And so we don't know if it is an oil amphora or a wine amphora. So you can see that the series, the content of the late series is completely unknown for the moment, and we have to be very modest with such documentation. And I finish with the most important types of the Byzantine times, which are the type 62, 61, and 8A. And we have no evidence except one analysis performed by Nicolas Garnier on one sherd showing us traces of oil. So we have to search more. I just want to finish with some different containers. We have evidenced these last years the presence in Africa of a lot of storage amphorae because they are very big amphorae which probably didn't move usually and were devoted to the conservation of grain, oil, and every foodstuff you can find in a farm or a house. For example, in Lambasis, we found this room with 5 exemplars of storage amphorae. And in the Ein Wassel excavation made by Mariette de Vos, they found a silo with 4 storage amphorae. The problem is that sometimes these amphorae are traveling. And we have some examples in a shipwreck, which could be normal. In this case, it's only for the use of the ship, but also in some terrestrial sites, for example, in Rome. In this case, it would be very dangerous to look for specific contents. And finally, as in Italy, and in Spain, we have in Africa a lot of different small containers which were probably devoted to the transport of some unknown foodstuff contents, and perhaps we could think to the garum, very specific garum or ointments, perfumes, we don't know. So we have to look for these containers also. In conclusion, I would say that we face the same difficulties of the identification of the contents for the beginning of the period as we saw yesterday in Spain, but perhaps even longer, because before the beginning of the 2nd century, it seems that it's really difficult to fix the different type with different contents. The contents are clearer from the 2nd century and to the end of the 4th century. It seems that with some efforts, we could arrive to the determination of good contents for each types. And at this time, the African amphora become the intelligent packaging, which are all the amphora of the Roman Empire. That means one shape telling the people what was inside. And lastly, really, we must work a lot because we have to know the contents of the late antique amphorae, which are completely unknown. I must say, and Gian agree, we discussed this morning at the breakfast, that the fight of the African Amphora content is perhaps one of the least advanced. And it's a pity because this region was so important for the production and the distribution of important foodstuffs. Now, I will give the word to my colleague, and she asked me to present you this, this map she will use. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, Gian Nassef from the University of Monastir in Tunisia will give us some ideas on the Amphora contents from Africa and the discussion.
Merci. Bonjour, veuillez m'excuser, je vais présenter mon papier en français. Bon, Michel a présenté la production, presque toute la production africaine, c'est-à-dire de la Tunisie actuelle. Je vais me concentrer sur une petite partie qui est encadrée en rouge, la partie est qui donne sur la mer, ce qu'on appelle la bizacène côtière, actuellement le Sahel. Bon, pourquoi le choix de cette région? Parce que c'est une région connue, région très riche en traces archéologiques, les traces de fours, les ratés de fours, etc., les amphores. Et on trouve même des ateliers qui ont produit essentiellement des amphores, uniquement des amphores. Et cette région est localisée donc par 4 principaux sites ou cités qui sont liés au port. Adrumète au nord, ensuite vous trouvez Leptiminus, ensuite Thapsus et enfin Selectum. Et ce sont des cités connues déjà à l'époque punique, à l'époque libyco-punique, et qui ont contribué beaucoup à l'économie romaine après. Et je vous signale par exemple, parmi ces cités, il y a Selectum qui a un bureau dans la place de corporation d'Ostie, un bureau des naviculaires. Bon, la première cité, c'est Adrumète au nord, mais Adrumète, c'est connu seulement à partir des timbres, les timbres qui étaient trouvés dans le bassin méditerranéen, éventuellement à Ostie et à Montestaccio, et qui mentionnent des amphores, qui mentionnent la cité, donc ce qui signifie qu'il y a des amphores qui proviennent de cette cité. Mais actuellement, on n'a pas trouvé jusqu'à maintenant des traces d'ateliers. La deuxième cité, c'est Leptiminus. Et Leptiminus, il y a beaucoup d'informations, il y a beaucoup de travaux, il y a 3 monographies jusqu'à maintenant. Leptiminus 1, 2, 3, donc par l'équipe de Mattingley, André Opait, etc. La troisième cité, c'est Selectum. Bon. Il y a la troisième Thapsus, je vais l'évoquer, et Selectum. Et Selectum, c'est déjà très connu parce qu'elle a diffusé ses amphores romaines, surtout 2e, 3e siècle, début à 4e siècle, dans tout le bassin méditerranéen. Surtout, on le trouve à Ostie et à Montestaccio. Les amphores, donc à Montestaccio, surtout les amphores africaines 1 de Selectum. Mais je vais commencer par les amphores. Je vais suivre un ordre chronologique. Je vais commencer par les amphores plutôt de type punique, ensuite de tradition punique, comme il était présenté par Michel. Bon, les amphores de l'époque punique tardive, je vais reprendre juste une petite phrase qui était mentionnée dans le récit de guerre de César en Afrique. Dans le chapitre 67, en cherchant des vivres, César s'arrêtait à Agar. Probablement, Agar, c'est une cité qui se trouve à Al-Maklouba. Et Al-Maklouba, c'est non loin de Selectum, c'est-à-dire en moyenne 6 km. Et qu'est-ce qu'il rapporte? Il revient au camp avec beaucoup d'orge, d'huile, bien sûr d'huile d'olive, de vin de filles et peu de blé. Donc nous avons déjà la mention des quelques denrées alimentaires qui pourraient être le contenu potentiel des amphores puniques. Donc on peut déduire d'après les denrées alimentaires apportées de ces amphores, de ces fermes, les deux contenus a priori de deux types puniques étaient donc l'huile et le vin. Et ces amphores donc, seraient attachés à deux grands types, Van der Werf 3 et Van der Werf 2, mis en évidence sur le site d'Usita. Et Usita, c'est à l'intérieur, un peu à l'intérieur de la région de Bizacen, c'est pas loin d'Adrumet, à quelques kilomètres d'Adrumet, et qui était produite sur l'atelier aussi d'El Maklouba, comme sur d'autres sites de Bizacen entre le 3e et le 1er siècle avant Jésus-Christ. Les données qui les concernent sont peu par rapport aux amphores africaines d'époque romaine. Van der Werf 2 et 3, les deux types, sur la base de prospection d'ateliers de l'île de Gerba, transportaient du vin, alors celle de la Bizacen côtière nous pousse à poser une autre question. Pourquoi les mobiliers funéraires des temps puniques qui se trouvent dans la région de Bizacen côtière comportent donc des amphores gréco-italiques vinaires, donc connus vénères, qui peuvent transporter du vin, et une de ces deux types de tradition punique est présente. Parce qu'on se demande s'il y a une amphore vinaire à l'intérieur de la tombe, pourquoi on met une deuxième amphore vinaire, mais de production locale. Bon, c'est pourquoi je me pose la question, donc c'est déjà une question été posée par Anna-Marie Abizi dans un article publié en 1989 sur les amphores romaines. Et je me pose encore la même question, pourquoi les deux amphores, s'ils transportaient du vin, pourquoi ils sont dans la tombe? Probablement, il me semble qu'ils peuvent transporter d'autres produits, peut-être de l'huile. La localisation aussi d'un autre atelier, le Gaal, c'est au nord, à quelques kilomètres au nord de Tapsus, ça appartient aussi de Tapsus, pourrait attribuer ce contenu pour ces amphores, c'est-à-dire même un autre contenu, c'est-à-dire la salsa menta. Et pourquoi? Parce que l'atelier de Legal, il est au bord de la mer et qui pose une autre hypothèse, pourquoi pas les dérivés de poissons aussi. On va voir, je reviens aussi sur l'atelier de site El Maklouba qui est au nord de Salakht, à quelques kilomètres, aussi de Gumi. Il y a à Gumi, c'est-à-dire Mehdia actuel, il y a des traces aussi des bassins qui sont liés à une activité halieutique. On se demande encore pourquoi pas des dérivés, ces amphores puniques ne transportaient pas des dérivés puniques. Bon, dérivés de poissons. De toute façon, en absence des analyses, les trois contenus classiques, c'est-à-dire le vin, l'huile d'olive et les dérivés de poissons, ce sont les contenus potentiels pour ces amphores. Voilà. Et pour la culture de la vigne, même s'il n'est pas un grand déchet dans cette région, n'écarte pas la possibilité de transporter aussi de vin. Sachant que la nécropole punique de Smirat, c'est aussi un autre site qui n'est pas loin de la côte, en Bizacen, a livré des bols et des jattes en poterie modelée portant un décor obtenu par impression des pépins de raisin groupés par 2 ou 3. Bon, ça c'est pour les types puniques, de type punique. Maintenant, je vais entamer les types romains, parce que ça date de l'époque romaine, mais il s'agit des amphores encore de tradition punique maintenant. La forme, c'est punique. L'époque, c'est romaine. Bon, il y a une découverte qui a eu lieu à Tapsus et qui concerne des amphores maintenant, un atelier qui a produit des amphores mais c'est les amphores de tradition romaine. Ce sont des formes de petite taille, donc des amphores comme les amphores puniques, même plus petites que les Van der Werf 2 et 3, dérivant donc du type Isuta 2. Leur diffusion est mal connue, leur diffusion est mal connue ou peu limitée. De ce fait, nous ignorons leur contenu. Les deux denrées classiques, c'est-à-dire le vin et les dérivés de poisson, pourraient être le candidat possible pour ces amphores si on retient l'idée qu'ils dérivent du modèle punique Isuta 2 comme a été présenté à Gerba. Ainsi, la culture de vigne est possible aussi que la production de vin si on prend en considération actuellement sa pratique dans les fermes de la région. Un autre argument, c'est-à-dire que je vais présenter, c'est la capacité moyenne de ces amphores par rapport à l'africaine 1, c'est-à-dire ces amphores ne passent pas à 70-80 cm d'auteur, alors que l'africaine Q1 peut atteindre 1 mètre d'auteur, et le diamètre de la panse des amphores de Thapsus ne dépasse pas une vingtaine centimètres. Donc la capacité n'est pas importante par rapport aux premières amphores romaines. Par ailleurs, ce n'est pas seulement à Thapsus qu'il y a eu une production d'amphores de tradition punique, c'est identifié à Leptimunus et à Selectum. Pour Leptimunus, c'est André Opait qui a identifié donc Leptimunus 1 et 2, qui présente des formes. Bon, pour moi, je vois, c'est une évolution des formes puniques. C'est à Salakta aussi les mêmes types qu'on les retrouve, Leptimunus 2 et 1. 2, c'est pas en grande quantité, mais Selectum 1, c'était énormément produit à Salakta par plusieurs ateliers. Selectum 8, ce qui correspond à Selectum 8. Et ce n'est pas par pure coïncidence qu'il transportait, qui par pure coïncidence ne semble pas transporter de l'huile. Je pense qu'il y a eu une découverte ancienne à Maison Africa à l'Igem du Sud-Russe, où là on trouvait des traces de poissons à l'intérieur de ce type de Leptimunus, ce type d'amphore. Donc, ces deux types se distinguent des Africains classiques par leur forme, c'est plutôt panse fuselée et cylindrique. Bon, maintenant, je passe au l'atelier qui a produit plus d'amphores, pour moi, peut-être aussi Leptimunus. Je vais parler de Selectum, et les ateliers de l'antique Selectum ont connu une effervescence d'activité artisanale dès la fin du IIe et au IIIe siècle, et les conteneurs sont de dimensions différentes, comme c'est signalé dans la première étude fondatrice de Zevi et Tchernia. Les deux modèles grands et petits provenaient, c'est-à-dire africaine 1 et africaine 2, provenant de ces ateliers, révélateurs de deux contenus différents par ces auteurs. En effet, le type africaine 1 est le type phare, c'est-à-dire le type le plus produit à Selectum, associé bien sûr à la production des grandes africaines, notamment 2A et 2D. Et c'est produit même sur les mêmes ateliers. Jusqu'ici, la lecture des timbres des amphores de Selectum n'a pas fourni des informations sur le contenu. L'exemple choisi, par exemple, comme argument par Michel Bonifay, c'était signalé dans la troisième monographie de Leptimunus 3 par Bonifay sur le timbre LEP orné d'un rinçon de pampre de vigne. C'est déjà présenté la photo, mis en évidence sur des Africains 3, c'est-à-dire qui 25, des ateliers de Leptimunus, et interprété comme une production liée au culte de Liber Pater. Ce décor peut se reporter à un emblème d'une corporation, il me semble, donc une corporation ou association qui s'occupe du commerce, notamment du commerce du vin. Par exemple, aussi, de notre côté, nous avons à Salakta, Selectum, des amphores qui portent des timbres avec une palme au centre composée soit d'une seule ligne, c'est comme le cas Usita 5210, donc deux lettres et entre les deux il y a une palme, ou nous avons les timbres de deux lignes sur des formes plus tardives comme africaine 1 et africaine 2 séparées par une palme. Il n'est pas ici lieu d'évoquer la culture du palmier ni du commerce de table à cette époque-là à Salakta. On penche plutôt avec prudence à un signe ou d'association d'une confrérie qui gère ou qui s'occupe du commerce ou tout simplement un décor ou une marque de potier. Par ailleurs, l'un des aspects de l'emballage d'Intelligent, basé sur la forme ou la typologie que sur les inscriptions, il me semble, ici pour le cas de Salakta, c'est une question ici d'imitation des formes connues pour leur contenu, notamment vinaire. Nous avons par exemple le type de Recel 30 qui a été présenté aussi par Michel, qui correspond au type Selectum 12 à Salakta, qui a été produit à petite échelle. Nous avons des traces, seulement des traces de production à un seul atelier dans les catacombes, et qui peut être ici parce qu'on produisait du vin, mais en petite quantité, et on tenait à le faire circuler dans un emballage qui n'est pas africain de tradition. C'est la même chose, il me semble, aussi en sud de Byzacène méridionale, comme le type présenté par Michel, le Dressel 2, 4, une imitation des amphores non africaines. Autre remarque mérite d'être signalée, les amphores africains classiques sont les seuls dotés de timbres par rapport aux amphores, on va voir après, les amphores tardifs. Des rares cas de premier amphore tardif portent quelques timbres. J'ai vu une seule amphore qui se rattache au type africain 3 qui 25, qui est exposée actuellement au musée de Mahdi et qui porte un timbre. Tandis que les africains tardifs ne portent pas d'indication épigraphique. Bon, peut-être des tutuli picti, mais jusqu'à maintenant, je n'ai pas rencontré des amphores tardifs africains qui portent de timbres. Bon, je passe maintenant au deuxième ensemble, c'est-à-dire les amphores tardifs. Non, je vais terminer rapidement. Bon, la première génération, c'est les amphores africaines 3, c'est-à-dire qui 25, qui sont produits que ce soit à Leptuminus et Salakta. Je ne veux pas tarder sur ça parce que c'était pleinement présenté par Michel. Pour l'Antiquité tardive, c'est-à-dire maintenant sur le 6e, 7e. Bon, c'est une période qui correspond à une reprise après un vide, parce qu'un vide, nous avons remarqué dans cette région donc, côtière, il n'y a pas une production tout au long du 5e siècle. Nous avons un vide. Je ne sais pas, ce n'est pas lieu ici de discuter les raisons, mais il y a une reprise de production, donc un hajir shaqaf à partir du 6e et 7e. Un hajir shaqaf, c'est-à-dire région de Sur-le-Sef au sud de Salakta. Vous avez une production aussi, bien sûr, à l'Eptiminus, au territoire de Tapsus, à Bir el-Hammam, et récemment à Mokni. Et ce sont des productions donc, importantes qui vont toucher tout le bassin, surtout la partie occidentale du bassin méditerranéen, Rome, ensuite Rome, bien sûr, le nord de l'Italie, le castrum de San Antonino, le sud de la Gaule, le delta de Rhône, etc. Ce qui est important pour ces productions, donc je vais terminer, c'est qu'il y a deux productions en même temps. Des amphores de grande dimension, qui 61, qui 62, de grande capacité, Et à la fin, nous avons des amphores de petite capacité, c'est-à-dire spatillon de type 3, la plus petite des spatillons. Et je me demande qu'est-ce qu'elle transportait, parce que c'est très petite, qui ne dépasse pas l'auteur de 40 cm, avec un diamètre réduit. Quel est le produit qui pourrait être transporté dans une amphore de petite taille, de petite dimension? Est-ce qu'il s'agit d'un produit précieux? Je ne crois pas à l'huile d'olive, impossible. Bon, impossible par tradition, parce qu'on transporte chez nous l'huile d'olive dans grands conteneurs. Et il y a les amphores globulaires qui émettent les amphores orientales, éventuellement l'Eitrom, Amphora et tout, et Amokni. Et ce sont des formes qui vont perdurer jusqu'au début du 8e. Et qu'est-ce qu'ils transportaient? Ça, c'est une question donc, à laquelle on doit répondre. Et je vous remercie. Je m'excuse pour...
Merci beaucoup. I don't know if Michel wants to answer or if we directly go to the public. Anyone want to make comments or questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay. It was a very exciting presentation. There was a lot of information, and both colleagues showed us how complicated it is when you work with amphora made in such a rich region like Africa, North Africa. I think that the problem is also complicated because in African case we have, for example, leptiminus or hadrometum or solectum producing olive oil and fish products and maybe also wine. I think that again we can have sometimes these exceptions from the rules when you have such huge quantities of products like olive oil or fish products. But I think that also we have to have in mind the existence of a certain hierarchies of products, because North Africa was one of the most important provider of olive oil before everything for the Annona Urbis. So the African producers needed to pay attention first of all to this state-controlled product. So I think that the fish production was mostly in the domain of the private producers, the private trade, and of course when they had an abundance of fish, they could also choose use even unused amphora, olive oil amphora in extreme situations. This is one point of the hierarchy of the products. The second point which I want to make is that we have to pay attention to the archaeological context of discoveries, because mixed cargo, like for example Cabrera, for sure was that the ship was loaded in a huge entrepot, which on the base of orders, they sent a large variety of products on the same ship, and that cannot be connected with delivery of the anana products. I'm quite sure that a ship carrying anana products was a very big ship, maybe over 70 tons, more, maybe 100, 400 tons, maybe. And when we find this such a huge ship, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we have already a ship with carrying only 1,000 and 1,000, 2,000 of, let's say, of Africana 1. We can be sure that that was an anona cargo. When it's very mixed, it's for sure it's involved. The private trade is involved, and when homogeneous cargo we find it, most likely it's a state-directed trade. That's it.
Thank you very much.
No, it was a remark about the very small containers you showed last time, Michel. Do you thought about échantillon possibility?
I don't know. I don't know because.
Because we have some other samples for, during imperial period. Not yes.
No, I'm not sure because you can find even some of these small containers. You can find them in inland regions. No, it's nothing. Does not seem to me to be linked with transport of big amphora. But I have no proof. I cannot answer to you. Now, for coming back to the question or comments by Andre Jopaitz, I think if we look for an anona cargo, so the answer is no. Because if you want to find a huge ship with only anona products, and perhaps also considering that in this case you have to find at least at the earliest Severian ship, we don't have. Always when you find Africana 1 amphora in an underwater context, it's mixed with Africana 2, which transported something else, or fish products which were not inside the anona, or wine which was not before the end of the 3rd century or the beginning of the 4th century. So it's really difficult, and I think that linking all the export of Africa to the anona, I'm not sure it's necessary. But I am not an economist, and I'm sure that in this room there are a lot of people more competent than me on this subject.
Well, besides that, I wasn't going to talk about this, but besides the owner of the ship can do what he likes. He is the owner. He can put on that what he wants, so long as he brings the cargo. The cargo gets, the anona cargo gets where it's meant to get. He can put anything on that ship. But anyway, that's what I just say. The kiln sites of Rafraf are absolutely full of the Van der Werf wands. So really, I saw them when I was walking along the beach. So really, I've said that to you before, Michel. It's really interesting to look if you walk along the coast. And I'm not very happy with your. Yes, I agree. Space fillets, and they really certainly look like the little spatea as space. It's perfectly reasonable. Tu comprends ce que j'ai dit? I've changed subject. the space, the little spatea, a space filler. Yes, it's
you
great.
don't like it?
Yeah, I like it, but I don't like where you get there. That they put whatever they like in them. I'm sure they already filled. You fill an amphora with the content, and then they're around and they put them in. So it's a bit strange the way you expressed it. I would say the amphorae are designed to hold certain things, like olives, maybe it's a good idea, or wine, or whatever it is. They fill them, and then they are around, and they put them in as space fillers. Slightly different concept.
Yeah. Most of the Spatea 1 were made in Nabel, as you know, and the production zone in Nabel are completely huge, and not far from the sea, not far from the entrepot, and I think we have the same idea because we work on this subject together. We are wondering whether the Nabel workshop could not have provided amphora for a large territory, not only Nabel, but also cities along the western coastline of the Cap Bon, and perhaps also plus loin. So in this case, yes, maybe the merchant who wanted to fill a ship could buy these containers, and then not far from the entrepot, not far from the sea. It was easy. It was not. Yes, I must remind you that these workshops are not linked with estates. The workshop of Sidi Zaruni is something like Vicus, small city. It's not linked with estates like it could be in Tripolitania, for example. There are huge production zones. The only activity was to produce the amphora. I don't know if I answer your question. I'm sorry.
Oh, yes, I, not surprisingly, have some questions about the Ostia 59 argument. And I assume that they're to you and to André as well. And it's a large and complex set of evidence that you only had a minute or two to characterize. So I assume that probably your interpretation is richer than you were able to represent in just a few sentences. But the first question has to do with the petrography of the forms. So you've had analyses done which I assume show the presence of Aeolian quartz, which suggests a North African origin. Is that more or less the position? But it's also the case, isn't it, that 2/3 of the island of Sicily has the same geology as North Africa, no?
But not in the region of Taormina.
But if you look at the map of Sicily, you'll see the northeastern section, the Monte Peloritani, that is metamorphic. And then you have the Etna complex, which is volcanic. And then the southern corner on the east coast near Syracuse is different again. But along the southern edge of the Etna complex is a little arm of the sedimentary complex, which goes all the way to the eastern coast of the island. So if you imagine amphora production in the area around Catania, and you just talked about the possibility that amphoras could be moved along a coast, they theoretically would have a composition which was compatible or similar to an African composition. Now, I'll admit that's disingenuous. I've reflected on this issue, and that's the best that I can say, but I would not be surprised if foodstuffs being packaged in the area of the Etna complex were actually being packaged in amphoras that were manufactured which had a petrography which was generally similar to that of African amphoras. I can't prove that, but I think it's a possibility. So I'm wondering whether, in fact, the exclusion that these could be Sicilian amphoras is based on just a general observation of Aeolian quartz, or whether there are more specific markers that exclude a Sicilian origin.
I think that Claudio Capelli, it's a pity that he could not come for financial reason, he's not here. He says that it doesn't exclude Sicily, but not the region, the eastern region.
Yeah.
It could be an Amphora from the western region, and Emmanuel Bott also participated to this collective study, and he knows very well the petrography of the northwestern coastline of Sicily, and I think you agree.
Well, I'm thinking about even amphoras like the Middle Roman I, for instance, which I think we all accept as Sicilian, right? That has a petrography which is not fundamentally different from that of African amphoras, right?
The problem with the mid-Roman amphorae that we call mid-Roman amphorae, finally a lot of different things.
Yeah, yeah.
More or less each Sicilian city produced wine, needed amphorae to put inside the wine, and they did amphorae which are all similar but all different. The true mid-Roman one, the one of Benghazi, is made, as it seems, in the region of Catania, because Claudio Capelli did a lot of thin section with Carmela Franco, who did her thesis, PhD, on this argument. And now he has a lot of reference samples from this zone and other zones of Sicily. And the problem was the petrography of the Ostia 59, similar only with the most western part of Sicily, and also with some inclusion inside, which are glauconite. I don't know if I cannot translate.
Yeah, I'm not certain what those would be in North Africa. There's occasional grains of clinopyroxene, but
which
those could be in Sicily also.
Very well known in the northern Tel in Tunisia, and could fit in with the region between Bizerte and Tabarka. And also an argument I didn't say, because it's not the subject of the conference, is that we re-examined the cargo of the Camarina wreck. And inside this wreck, you can find both Ostia 59 and 23. And the interesting thing is that they are associated with the main transport of Shemtu marble. So this is another argument for Tabarka, or the region of Tabarka, or even Utica region, if in this case the marble could also...
Yeah, I would also add that one of the descriptions in the literature, I forget which, of a hand specimen of this says that it has black inclusions, which would again be compatible with a volcanic origin. But moving along, to me, maybe the most interesting or the aspect of this that gave me the most trouble was that if you, and Andrei perhaps can discuss this, when you look at the representation of this family of Tituli Picti in CIL4, it's very difficult to understand what sorts of containers they were on. And we can all sort of say bad things about Della Corte and his recording and things like that. But I think, as I argued, it's clear that they must have been represented on a variety of different kinds of containers, some of which I would argue almost certainly, well, they were calling him the Shona 8, which means it should be a Dressel 2 to 4. And so if some of these Tituli Picti are appearing on container, in the same family with the same structure, are appearing on other kinds of containers, then those containers logically should also be from the areas you're talking about. Is there evidence for that, or have you tried to account for that fact? I see puzzlement, and have I not explained that clearly, or?
Emmanuel, maybe you have information about?
And then
I suppose you wanted to mean Sean 11, but not Sean 1, because what we saw in Pompeii with Alicia Contino was we saw most of the part of Ostia 59 bearing this tituli picti. Ah, 8, okay. But we also see that there are a lot of mistakes in the publication of CEL4.
Yeah.
Yes,
No,
yes.
concerning these early containers, I must just give an information that a young PhD students just finished her thesis, PhD, on the early African amphora from the Nuovo Mercato Testaccio in Rome, and she worked a lot with Claude Capel, and they will bring a lot of new information, and we are waiting for. So she. Not disingenuous. The size is not good. There's petrographic issues. I think maybe Occam's razor suggests you were right and I'm not, but it's complicated.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dario?
So I just wanted to say two ideas. The first one is concerning the first century AD African amphora. When working together with the colleagues from Ca' Foscari University in this impianto elettrico project that we will publish in some months, we also make some residue analysis of some of these amphora, and as far as I remember, and it's Sandra who can give the proper data, we have oil in Ostia 59, okay? So maybe this is interesting also for your topic. And the question is related to the Africana 2D amphora, which I love that they had salsamenta inside. So the question, as you probably have seen in one of the posters, there is one African amphora of this type that was found in Matharon near Carthagena, full of fish. So when you take a look at the poster, you say, okay, reuse, for sure. It could not be a reuse. The fish composition, the fish remains that they have found inside this amphora in the poster is completely different to the local amphora. Okay.
But it's not the same date.
Sorry?
It's not the same date, chronology?
You mean the chronology of the amphora?
The chronology of both the amphora is not the same?
I don't know exactly. You know, but the idea was that in the garum shop of Pompeii, as you know very well, they were processing fish from Calabria. Most of the Dressel 21, 22 found there came from Calabria, which is very far away. So maybe in these fish salting plants, they were tasting or using, you know, salsamenta from other areas of the Mediterranean. So maybe that's a good example to have in mind concerning the original contents of this African type. Maybe.
There are some different problems. In fact, I can't decide the typology of this amphora of the poster. Looks like an Africana 2D, but it's not really. And I'm wondering, also the stamp is a little bit strange. I'm wondering if it could not be a northwestern production, west of Carthage, in this zone, which is not well known. can't understand really the chronology of this type. I discussed with Miriam, and she cannot tell me. It's impossible to tell. I think if the fish are more Spanish than African. Yes, a lot of, and in fact, yes, it was something which could go in the same way as Theodore told us the first day. That means reuse of the African amphora in Spanish fish factories, but all the arguments are completely scattered, and it's really difficult to use them. I don't know. And also for me, the problem, and I think for Gian also, is that, well, it's a very problem, this type 2D, because we have some argument for fish and some other for wine. And it's completely disturbing. And we have, maybe we have to do a lot of, a series of analyses. Maybe it could be a solution, because we don't have titulipicti, or we have to do a systematic campaign of infrared research on the neck in order to see if we can see something written. If not, we are completely lost.
The last remark concerning the DNA analysis that you have mentioned related to this, can you give some more details?
Yes, it's an amphora. Unfortunately, the neck is missing. That's why I said that it's doubtful, but the general shape is close to the Africana 2D. This amphora comes from the Lyon excavation, the Parc Saint-Georges excavation. The study is made by Tony Silvino and the analysis by Catherine Eli, published in 2007. No, I think macro remains.
Michel, I have a question about the titulipicti, especially the one that is mentioned by Dressel on the Neopunic example. I think it's a 28. And there is, maybe we can read it as Halek. So I have two questions about it. This Neopunic type, are there other titulipicti that are known? And secondly, what to think about a Halek?
I'm not competent for answering the second question. I think that somebody else could help you for the Halek. And concerning the first part of your question is, I didn't understand well what the first part of your question is.
Are there other amphorae of this type with titulipicti?
I don't know. I just picked this information in the Stephanie
Yeah.
Martin-Kilcher's publication.
Well, and the
of
example
99.
of Stephanie Martin-Kilcher.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I think she probably looked for the...
Apparently not.
Not.
No.
But the problem, as we said, that we have very few titulipicti on
Yes.
African amphora. That's really a problem for us. Concerning the Halek, I'm sorry, but I'm completely ignorant.
And is it possible that it is a good reading, Halek, or could that be wrong? Or?
As far as I know, we have no, but perhaps I'm wrong, we have no really first painted inscriptions dealing with Halek. I published one where I considered this, but nowadays I think it is not Halek, but it is other ones. We know another one from Cologne, which is a secondary inscription. So it is not in black, but in red, and on the other side of the amphory. So we know of Halek naturally by the literary sources, but as a real amphora contents from painted inscription, it's difficult.
So you mean that the reading could be something else, or like you mean that the reading of the Titulus Pictus could be something else?
I could say something
Just
about ALEC.
last remark.
I could say a little thing about ALEC. I think it can exist as a semi-processed fish sauce residue, which would be rebrined and a new sauce would be taken. And what would happen is the bones would be discarded when all the fish meat had been dissolved. And so ALEC as a product that can be consumed, I think, is very similar to pissalat, and it's bone-free, and it would be a product which rises to the surface when you make fish sauce, because as the fish sauce becomes more dense, the specific gravity rises, therefore anything lighter is going to rise to the surface. It can then be scooped off, and it is a bone-free, smooth fish paste. So it's pissalat or it's anchovy paste that we see in Britain. And I don't think it will be transported in that state. It would possibly be transported in little vessels, but when you see fish bones and you call it ALEC, I don't think it's ALEC, I think it's just semi-processed fish sauce waiting to have a new sauce taken off it. So there are two types, in a sense. We can still call the bones and fish meat ALEC, but it's not a product you eat.
Just last.
Thank you. Just reminding you of the weakness of our evidence for the content of this type of employee and the other type, too tituli picti, difficult to read or interpret, and so yes, we have to work a lot on the content of the African employee, and for the moment we have to be very modest with the interpretation. I think so, I don't know.
Also with the residue analysis, they are really too few in order to build big interpretations. And again, we should do systematic analysis. One sample there, another there is really difficult to build things.
But anyway, Michel, I think that the paper, this is true, but it is also true that we were considering till 5 years or 8 years ago all African amphora as oil amphora, and now we know that they are not all oil amphora, and this is a very important economic issue. And there are still some colleagues, historians, not specialized in amphora, who are always saying that all of them are oil amphora. So I think that our progress has been a lot in this sense, you know.